Hello, I'm Mark Danneman. Today, let's talk about how to round numbers using just the built-in Power Automate math expressions. So here we have the math functions that are available to us in Power Automate. It's not everything we want, but it's most of what we need. The key to rounding a number in Power Automate is utilizing this mod function, which stands for modulo. And the modulo means remainder. So it returns the remainder from dividing two numbers. So if you divide 5 by 2, the modulo is going to be 1 because 1 is left over. So 2 goes in there twice to make 4, and there's 1 left over to make 5. So you get the 1 back for the modulo. Another cool thing you can do with the modulo function is you can extract the decimal portion of any number by using a divisor of 1. So for example, if you've got 1.5, like I've got right here, if I divide 1.5 by 1, the return is going to be 0.5 because that's the modulo, that's the remainder, it's 0.5. If any number that you divide by 1, if there's a decimal portion on that number, you will get the decimal portion back as the remainder using the mod function. So that's how you extract the decimal out of any number. And then to get the integer to round down to the nearest integer on any number, all you got to do is subtract the mod of that number from that number. So if we had a variable in Power Automate called x, this is the expression we would use right here. We would say sub variable x, comma, mod variable x, comma 1. So we're taking the mod of that, the remainder of that variable number divided by 1, which will be any decimal if there is one, and we're subtracting that out of that variable number at the top. That will return just the integer portion, just the portion on the left side of the decimal. So we can expand upon this logic to round up to the nearest 10th place, for example. So we could write an expression out like this, where we're taking our variable x and we're checking to see if the decimal portion of our variable number, if it's greater or equal to 0.5. So if the decimal portion of our number is 0.5 or up, then what we're going to do is we're going to subtract that decimal portion from the number and then add 1 to the number. So basically let's say our number is 1.5. So the decimal portion is going to be 0.5, and that is greater than or equal to 0.5. So we'll default to the true result, and we will take that number, 1.5, we will subtract the decimal, 0.5, so we get 1, and then we're going to add 1 to it to make 2, and that is rounding up. Now the default case, let's say our number was 1.49. So in that case, 0.49, the decimal portion up here, would not be greater or equal to 0.5. So we would go to the default down here, and we would subtract from 1.49 the decimal portion, which comes from the mod function here, which would be 0.49, subtracted from 1.49 would give us 1. So we'd be rounding down in that case. So that's the logic you could use to do a simple round up or down. So we can expand upon this logic even more and create ourselves a child flow that will take inputs. It will take a number input, and we'll also take a decimal places number input. And we can use that information to calculate, to round our number to that decimal place that is provided in the trigger. So I'll demonstrate this here. We will pick a number. We'll just type a number in. We'll say 1 point, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we want to round to the nearest, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4th place. So we want to round to right here. So we'll give it 4 and click run. So our flow ran very quickly here. Each step took less than a second. Let's check the outputs. Our input number is right here. The round to the nearest decimal is 1, 2, 3, 5. And that's right, because we told it we wanted to round to the nearest fourth decimal place. So that's 1, 2, 3, and this is the fourth. In our input, the fourth place was 4, but after that we have a 5. So because that 5 is a 5, so it's 5 or greater, we go up 1. So that's what I'm going to show you how to do here in this flow, how to build on that logic we looked at earlier of how to round up or down and how to incorporate this decimal places portion into the calculation. Also here in my output, I do a integer round up and an integer round down. So if we were to round this down like in Excel, we would type in equals round down the number comma 0 for 0 decimal places. It would give us a 1. If we did the same thing with round up, it would give us a 2. Now let's walk through how this works. First, we have our trigger, and our inputs are a number that we want to round and then decimal places that we want to round it to. And I made this optional. If the user doesn't put anything in there, it will default to 0. So this scope section here, I've just organized all my actions that relate to rounding to a decimal place here. The first step is we determine how many decimal places the user gave us. And so that's done with a coalesce. So we coalesce the trigger input for the decimal places with a 0. That's because I made it optional. So if the user doesn't put anything in, it defaults to 0. Now it says number 1 here. That's just how this is named. So if I were to go in here and click decimal places, we get number 1. After we get the decimal places, I determine the multiplier length. That's just my name for this step. And what I'm doing with multiplier length is I want to multiply the number by however many decimal places we're going to. So we're adding 1 to whatever the decimal place input is. So we're adding 1 to that, and I'll show you why next. Okay, so next, after we've determined how long our multiplier is going to be, and that's just by adding 1 to the decimal places requested, what I'm going to do is I'm using a select action here. Now this is a bit of a hack because what we're trying to do is we're trying to get a power of 10 and that corresponds to the length or the desired decimal place. And there's no exponent function in Power Automate. What we're doing here is we're using a select, and the input to the select is going to be a range. So the range creates an array of numbers. And we're doing a range that starts with 1, and then the length of the range is going to be the multiplier length that we got above. So for example, if our length was 3, this will generate an array that goes 1, 2, 3. Well, that's similar to what we need. What we need is 100. What we get is 123. Now, the way to convert this into a power of 10 that I need is with the map section here on our expression. So let me blow this up a little bit. All I've got to do is I take that input range, which will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever, however far it goes. I take that and I just put this code in for the mapping, and I say if equals item, so the item is going to be the current number. If item equals 1, I want 1. If it doesn't equal 1, I want 0. So 1 is only going to be in there once at the very beginning because of how we wrote this. We tell it 1 is the start of the range. So everything that comes after 1 is going to be an incremented integer. So 1's only going to be there once at the top, and that's going to be our only 1. It's going to stay 1. Everything else is going to be turned into 0. And so now what we're going to have, if our input is 3, if our desired length is 3, it's going to be 1, 0, 0. So that's almost what we need. Now all we need to do is combine it into an actual number. And what I do that down here with this multiplier action. This is a compose that I added. I called it multiplier. And all I do here, I'll start from the inside and work my way out. What I do is I do a join expression On the output of this generate digits range array above, the select action that generated our array, and I join each item in there with a blank space, and then I wrap that in an int function. So it converts that join into an integer. So if my numbers in this array are 1, 0, 0, they'll get combined into a string that says 1, 0, 0. And then if I put an int on that, it turns into 100 or 1,000 or 10,000, etc. So that's my little hack on how to get a power of 10 based on a number. Next, we multiply the input number by the power of 10 we end up with. It's a simple multiply function here. We take our input number from the trigger and we multiply it by that multiplier we just made above. So that gets the number multiplied. The next step is we need to extract the decimal portion after we've multiplied our number. And that's done with the modulum function, the mod function. We just take the multiplied number, the number up here that we multiplied against the power of 10 we're using, and we do the modulum of 1 of it. So we basically divide it by 1 and get the remainder. We use that next to get the integer of our multiplied number. So all we're doing here is we're taking our multiplied number, the input number multiplied by the power of 10 based on the decimal places, and we subtract the decimal we extracted with the mod function out of that number. And so that will basically round us down. Now here we've got another function that's a little complicated, so we'll also take a look at this in VS Code. What we're doing here is we are deciding whether we're rounding up or down. So we're doing the actual rounding to the nearest decimal right here. So we do this if, the whole thing's in an if, and the if is based on a greater than equals expression calculation, and we're taking that decimal that's left over after we multiply the number. So we've multiplied the number, we extracted the decimal with the mod function, and now we're checking if that is greater than or equal to 0.5. So if the decimal left over is greater or equal to 0.5, what we're going to do is we're going to add 1 to the integer of our multiplied number. If it's the default, if it's less than 0.5, we're just going to return the integer of the multiplied number. That's basically the multiplied number rounded down. So that's this function here. I call this round nearest multiplied. So that's basically our answer, but it's still multiplied by the powers of 10 that we calculated. So we've got to get it back down to the real number we want, and we do that with a division. We divide that one we just calculated above, the nearest multiplied, and we divide it by the multiplier. So if we've multiplied it by 10, we divide it by 10 here. If we multiplied it by 100, we divide by 100. If we multiplied by 1,000, we divide by 1,000, etc. And that gets you the rounded to the nearest decimal place answer right here. And then in our final section here, we're just going to round to the nearest integers. And this is simpler. We start by getting the modulum of our input number. So we just take our straight input number, no multiplying it by anything, and we divide it by 1, and we end up with the remainder, the decimal remainder. Here's the final round down integer. So all we're doing is here is we're subtracting the decimal remainder from the input number. So that rounds us down to the nearest down integer. We also calculate the final round up integer, and all that is that's the integer, the nearest down integer, add 1 to it, that's the nearest up integer. So that's our round up. Very simple. Final check, this is, I just display, this was here for testing purposes, so I can delete this. This is just for me to look at it when I was rerunning tests. Here we respond to a power app or flow, so this is how we pass this information back to the flow that called it or the app that called it. And I return the decimal places that were in the input. I return the nearest, here round nearest decimal. So that's the one that we multiplied and then divided again. So that goes right here. So the rounded to the nearest decimal goes here. The round up, this is the nearest integer up, goes here. Round down, the nearest integer down goes here. And then I also put the original number in again right here. That's all there is to it. Let's test our child flow from another flow. So I just made another flow here real quick. Let's give this an input. I'm creating an array basically of random numbers. So let's say we want to do range. And let's start with 0. We'll go to 100, let's say. Let's make it 25. How about that? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a float. Then I'm going to do concat. And then I'm going to do random between 0 and 2000, let's say. And then I'm going to do a period. And then I'm going to do another random between 0 and I'll just do 999. And that should do it. So what we're doing here is we're concatenating a string that has a random number, then a period, then another random number, and then we're turning that string into a float. So let's hit update. Are you sure there's a problem? I didn't think so. Okay, that should create random numbers with decimals for us. And now let's do apply to each. And I'm looping through that array there. And now let's do child flow. Okay, I'm going to switch back to the old designer because for whatever reason, I cannot select anything in the new designer when I add a run child flow action. Here we go. Now we've got our selector. And we're going to pass in the current number. So that'll just be item. Decimal places, let's just round each one to 2. I'm going to do a compose to save the results. I'll just do the whole body. I'm just going to call this round. And since this is in a one-dimensional loop, no nested loops, we can probably just build an array here of everything we did above. So I'll do outputs round. Call this results. Up here, I'm just looking at the current item. All right, let's give this a test. Cross our fingers. The new designer has been so goofy lately. Like it does this thing where the arrows drop off. But I found if I restart my browser or restart the computer, they come back. It's very odd. So maybe it's a me problem. Okay, let's run. Let's see. Did we get actual floats? We did. We got random floats now. Great. So our flow ran. It only took 13 seconds to go through those 25 numbers. Fraction of a second per calculation for the rounding on each flow. And down here, I should have an array of all the outputs. So we can see our input number here was this number. We're rounding to the nearest second place. So because it's 0.187, we end up with 0.19. And that's right. Here's the nearest integer up and nearest integer down. Here we've got another long one, 0.7828, rounded to the nearest second place. It ends up with 0.78. It's because this 2 is below 5, so we just get the 8. Here is one that has 0.2183. So because the third place is an 8, above 5, we round up. We add 1 to the number before, which was 1, so we end up with 2. So it's working. Well, there you have it. That's how you can create a child flow to round numbers to the nearest decimal place in Power Automate. I hope you enjoyed it. Check out the blog post in the description below, and have a great day.